Hi, boys and girls. We are continuing our story, Detectives in Togas. So, when we last left off, all the boys were at Rufus's house, and they were telling Rufus basically that he had written Caius as a dumbbell on the Minerva Temple. And Rufus is saying, I did not do that. I don't know where you're getting this. I didn't do that. So that's where we left off. He's very serious. So this is chapter 6, handwriting. The boys were taken aback. It had not occurred to them that Rufus might not be the culprit after all. Promise? Mucius demanded. I promise, Rufus repeated firmly, raising his right hand. That's my right hand. Mucius whirled around and fixed the others with suspicious eyes. What about the rest of you? He asked threateningly. It certainly wasn't me, Publius said angrily. I've told Caius often enough to his face that he's a dumbbell. There was no need for me to write it on some wall. Okay. This is Publius. We haven't talked a lot about him. He said he would just tell him face to face. Perhaps one of Vinicius's slaves is responsible, Antonius suggested. Caius might have played some trick on him, like slipping nettles into his bed. To get even, the slave wrote Caius as a dumbbell on the temple wall. Doesn't that make sense? What slave in Rome is crazy enough to desecrate a temple? Julius pointed out. Remember, his dad's a judge. We're the dumbbells, Julius said slowly, squinting rather anxiously at Rufus. Didn't Claudia tell us that Caius recognized Rufus's handwriting at once? That's a lie, Rufus protested. How can it be my handwriting if I didn't do it? Mucius frowned. But Caius seemed to think he knows your handwriting very well. Rufus gave a forced laugh. That's a good one. Caius is too dumb to recognize anybody's handwriting. He can hardly read yet. His friends did not laugh at his joke. They looked at him seriously. This put an end to Rufus's humor. He fell silent and began thinking. At last he sighed with relief. I can prove it. I can prove that it's not my handwriting, he said triumphantly. How? Mucius asked. Give me a writing tablet, Rufus said. I'll write Caius as a dumbbell, and then you'll see right away that that scrawl in the temple could not have been written by me. This sounded simple enough, and the others agreed. So Rufus took a stylus and a tablet, and he prepared to scratch the words into the wax. Remember, they didn't have paper like we have and pencils. They had to use stylus. They had to use wax. But you must write just the way you always do, Julius warned him. And write it as big as you did last night in school, Mucius directed. Rufus nodded, and he sat hunched on his bed, tilting his head to one side as he wrote. He kept running the tip of his tongue nervously over his lips. Having completed his sample of handwriting, he handed the wax tablet to Mucius. Remember, this is Rufus. There, that's how I write it, he said with self-assurance. The other boys crowded behind Mucius and peered at the tablet. Well, Rufus asked uneasily, why don't you say something? Mucius mumbled, rubbing his nose in embarrassment. It looks just like the writing on the wall of the temple, said Antonius, who had an excellent memory. No, Flavius disagreed. It looks altogether different. To tell the truth, I no longer remember it, Mucius admitted. Neither do I, said Julius. Well, we'll check up on that right away, Antonius said, and snatching the tablet from Mucius's hand, I'll run over to the temple and compare the two handwritings. Wait, I'll go with you, Publius said. Otherwise, you'll be telling us crazy stories when you get back. Whoa, that's a good idea, Mucius said. But be careful that nobody catches you near the temple, especially with that tablet in your hands. Now that is Mucius. He is the one with the common sense. Remember him? Okay. A good idea. Well, Antonius said, "You can depend on that," and sped out the door, followed by Publius. An embarrassed silence fell in the little room. Rufus refused to look at his friends. He sat staring absently down at his toes, which were sticking out from under the blanket. After a while, he asked hesitantly, "Haven't any of you been to school today?" "By the gods!" Mucius exclaimed. "We almost forgot to tell you. Xanthippus has forgiven you." Rufus looked up, scarcely daring to believe what he had heard. He's forgiven me? Then he doesn't intend to talk to my mom?" "No," Julius said. "He only wanted to give you a good scare." Rufus sat numbed. "If only I'd only known that," he whispered under his breath. I wonder why he's whispering that under his breath. But the others paid no attention. Flavius said, "After the vacation, you can come back to school." "You see, we're all on vacation," Julius explained, and he launched into the story of the assault on Xanthippus. "But who could have attacked him?" Rufus asked wonderingly when Julius had finished. "That's the mystery," Mucius said, "and the funny part of it is that nothing was stolen but a few silly mathematics books and some pictures." He then went on to tell Rufus about Claudia and her father's threats. Rufus was shaken when he heard that the senator wanted to report him to the prefect of the city. "But I didn't have anything to do with it," he stammered. "If you really didn't, we'll go to the senator and tell him so," Julius said consolingly. He felt sorry for Rufus. All the boys liked Rufus. He was a good sport. He was always full of fun and good ideas for games. They heard Antonius and Publius returning, and even before he reached the door, Antonius called out, "The handwriting is exactly just the same." He came running in, wax tablet in hand. "I was right. The writing on the wall looks exactly like the writing on the tablet." "It's true," Publius seconded. Remember, Publius went with him. We don't know a lot about him. He went right with him. "I'll bet a gold piece against a single sesterce that Rufus wrote it." "On my word of honor, I did not write it," Rufus cried out in anguish. "You must have," Publius said. "No," Rufus asserted at the top of his voice, and suddenly his eyes widened, and he said as though he had found the answer and were frightened by it, "My handwriting has been forged." "What? How?" Mucius demanded. "Somebody has copied my handwriting," Rufus announced. "But why?" Flavius asked. "So that people will think I did it," Rufus replied, staring into space with sadness, resignation, and fright in his eyes. "Well," Julius murmured, "who do you think could have copied your handwriting?" Rufus hesitated for just a moment, and then he said softly, "How should I know?" "We are wasting valuable time," Mucius said angrily. "You must run away. We have already planned where to hide you." "No, I won't," Rufus declared hotly. "If I run away, people will feel certain that I did it. My own father and mother would believe it." At this, Mucius's patience gave out. "You are crazy," he accused Rufus. "Do you want to have your hands chopped off or be dumped into the Tiber River?" He instantly regretted these harsh words, for Rufus cried out in despair, "You think I'm lying, but I really did not do it." And then he turned toward the wall and he drew his blanket up over his ears, and the boys could hear his smothered sobbing. So he is crying because no one believes that he didn't do it. Julius tried to soothe him. "We don't think you're lying, but it is very hard to copy anyone's handwriting. My father once told me that." His father's the judge. "The forger would have had to study your handwriting for a long time in order to learn how you wrote any letter." Rufus sat up with a jerk. "The writing tablet!" he cried out. "The tablet I hung on the classroom wall, Caius is a dumbbell, is written on that." The others did not understand what he was getting at. "You're talking in riddles like an oracle," Publius said. "Perhaps the person who broke into school wanted to steal that tablet in order to copy my handwriting." said Rufus. But nothing was missing except some books and pictures, Julius pointed out. Rufus looked dismayed, but Antonius began to jump with excitement. Hey, he exploded, the writing tablet was gone! Don't you remember? It was not hanging on the wall this morning. Their faces all brightened. There's Antonius. We must go back to school at once, Mucius said. If it was stolen, Rufus is right. That will prove once and for all that his handwriting was forged. How so? Publius asked. How so, Mucius mocked his manner, because otherwise no burglar would bother to steal a writing tablet. You have something there, Publius admitted. Get dressed quickly and come with us, Mucius told Rufus. But Rufus looked embarrassed. No, I've caught a cold, he stammered, and he went into a coughing fit. On the whole, it will be better for him to keep out of sight, Julius said. All right, stay here, Mucius said. We'll be back soon. So the boys piled their school things in a corner, and they set out at once. As soon as they were gone, Rufus peered hastily under his bed. Whew, he sighed again with relief and leaned back against his pillow. Okay, here's another mystery. What is Rufus hiding under the bed? And he obviously doesn't have a cold, so why is he pretending that he has a cough? More mysteries. This book is full of mysteries. Xanthippus was surprised when his pupils unexpectedly returned. He was sitting up in bed reading his right leg wrapped in wet cloths. In the apartment's tiny kitchen, a woman was busying herself with the cooking. Hearing the boys, she peered curiously around the corner of the room and grinned cheerfully at them. Teacher sick, no school, she chuckled. Poor man, bad pains. Oh, oh. She rolled her eyes to express her sympathy and then returned to her pots and pans. Why have you come back? Xanthippus asked crossly. Mucius asked for Rufus's writing tablet. What tablet? Xanthippus wanted to know. The one that has Caius is a dumbbell written on it. Xanthippus was instantly suspicious. What do you want with it? He asked. Rufus would like to have it back so that he can erase it, Mucius lied boldly. He's ashamed about it. The boys had decided on the way not to mention the desecration of the temple to their teacher for fear that it would stir up his anger against Rufus all over again. So he's ashamed, is he? Xanthippus said with satisfaction. Well, about time. The tablet must be lying in the chest over there. Isn't it hanging in the classroom anymore? Julius asked hypocritically. He only wanted to know why Xanthippus had removed it. No, Xanthippus said. I don't care to have such things on exhibit on the walls of my school. I put it away in the chest last night. You boys must have noticed it when you cleaned up. The boys rushed to the chest and went through it from top to bottom, but the writing tablet was not there. It's gone, Mucius reported, inwardly triumphant. Then you boys must have misplaced it, Xanthippus scolded. That's what comes of your careless way of doing things. The boys searched all the shelves and finally went through the entire classroom, but the writing tablet could not be found. Back at Xanthippus's bedside, Mucius made his solemn announcement. The thief who was here last night stole Rufus's writing tablet. A strange thing to steal, Xanthippus said vexedly. That tablet isn't worth a copper penny. The boys bid Xanthippus goodbye. But as they were on the way out, Mucius noticed something shiny lying under the wardrobe. He stooped and fished it out. Look what I found, he said. It was a short, wide gold chain with a flat disc of gold at one end, a hook on the other. Apparently the hook had been forced open and bent upward. Mucius brought the chain to Xanthippus. Is this yours? He asked. No, Xanthippus replied, and for a while he regarded the chain thoughtfully, and suddenly he gave a short laugh. But I can tell you to whom it belongs. Who? The boys asked excitedly, half guessing the answer. It belongs to the burglar, Xanthippus said. Here's a picture of the boys coming into the kitchen at Xanthippus's house. Can you tell who's who? Chapter 7, The Newspaper. I remember now how it happened, Xanthippus continued. I tried to grip the burglar by the throat, but instead my hands closed on something metallic which came loose. That must have been the chain. Probably it was kicked under the wardrobe in our tussle. He examined the chain more closely. This is the type of chain that goes on the collar of a rain cloak as a sort of clasp. Look here, the disc was sewed onto the collar. A few threads of wool are still clinging to the holes. There was probably a second disc with an eye for the hook. When I tugged at the chain, the hook was bent straight and slipped out of the eye. The chain is very beautifully worked, by the way. What are those funny pictures? Antonius asked, rubbing his finger over the gold disc. Your hands need washing, Xanthippus reproved him. Those marks engraved on the disc are hieroglyphs, Egyptian picture writing. Hieroglyphics. Now all we need to do is find the owner of the chain, and we'll have the burglar, Mucius said hopefully. Ridiculous, Xanthippus said. Rome has a population of 500,000 people. A fine chance you have of finding the one cloak this chain belongs to. No, it's not much of a clue. Here, keep the chain. It's yours. Delighted, Mucius thanked his teacher and dropped the chain into his pocket. The servant came in with a stack of damp cloths to apply to Xanthippus's sore leg, and the boys were sent away. As they crossed the forum, they passed by the great sundial back of the orator's platform and saw that the third hour of the day had already begun. We ought to hurry, Julius said. Rufus must be terribly anxious for us to get back to him. Rufus can wait, Mucius said. We must see Vicinius first. Why Vicinius? The others asked in surprise. To keep him from going to the prefect of the city about Rufus, Mucius explained. We'll tell him that somebody forged Rufus's handwriting. But he knows we're Rufus's friends, and so he won't believe us, Publius objected. This remark had a dampening effect on the boys' spirits. Mucius murmured. I never thought of that. How about this? Julius proposed. We will take the writing tablet on which Rufus wrote for us this morning and have my father look it over and compare it with the writing on the temple. Since my father is a judge, he will be able to tell right off that the writing was forged, and he can write a letter about it to Vinicius. How long will that take? Mucius asked. A couple of days, Julius said with a crestfallen air. That long? Mucius exclaimed. Well, see, my father is in Pompeii right now, Julius explained. He had to go down and preside over a gladiatorial show he sponsored. Wow, this is before Mount Vesuvius erupted and covered the city of Pompeii. It was before that. That's when our story takes place. Interesting. Okay. We cannot wait that long, Mucius said. Vinicius was once a judge himself, Flavius said. Perhaps he can compare the handwritings. Well, that's a fine idea, Mucius said, and Flavius grinned proudly. Publius was sent off to obtain the writing tablet from Rufus, after which he would meet the others in front of Vinicius's house. Publius was the fastest runner among the boys. He had long, skinny legs and always came out first in races. All right, so Publius is very fast. Finally, we have something to write on his paper about it. Pleased with his assignment, he shot off like an arrow. In the meanwhile, the forum, empty a few hours ago, had become a bustling place, swarming with people who poured in from all the side streets. From the noise and buzz of talk, it might have been a chariot race at the Circus Maximus. Everywhere there were groups of citizens discussing the affairs of the day, their togas billowing in the breeze. An especially large crowd stood in front of the massive building which housed the National Archives. Curious, the boys forced their way boldly to the front of this crowd, but they were disappointed. There was nothing to see except the daily newspaper, which had just been hung out by two of the censor's officials. The latest news had been written on it in neat handwriting, and the people were pressing forward eagerly to read it. In the front row of the crowd stood several well-dressed slaves, the copyists of rich patricians, who copied the news on wax tablets with astonishing speed. Back at home, their masters waited impatiently for the transcribed bulletins. So it's not like a newspaper you think of today. They're on these waxed tablets
and they are hung out to dry, basically. Antonius, Flavius, and Julius wanted to go on. They had been hoping for something more sensational than the dull old newspaper. But Mucius did not move, and he stared in fascination at the news. "There's something about the temple of Minerva," he whispered to the others. "Where?" Flavius asked. "Not so loud," Mucius shushed him. "There, down near the middle." The writing was small, and it took Antonius, Julius, and Flavius a moment before they discovered the item. Then, with glowing alarm, this is what they read. "Last night, the temple of Minerva on the Esquiline, erected in honor of our emperor, was desecrated." That means messed up, by the way. "By the impudent hand of a shameless boy. Smeared with red paint on the eastern wall of the temple are the words, 'Caius is a dumbbell.' This impious act will certainly arouse the indignation of all right-minded citizens of Rome. It is high time that the authorities took energetic measures to combat such delinquency among our modern youth. The temple faces the home of His Honor, Senator Vinicius. In all likelihood, the insult is directed against the senator's son, Caius. Young Vinicius is a pupil at the well-known Xanthos school. It seems evident that the guilty boy would be one of his fellow pupils with whom Caius may have quarreled. We hope that the senator will promptly question his son in order to discover the culprit and turn him over to the police at once. Public opinion will not rest until this young hooligan is behind bars, a respecter of the emperor." Oh no. How is this already in the newspaper? I don't think Vinicius has had time to go to the police yet. Something is afoot, but we don't know what it is. And that's the end of chapter 6 and 7. So we'll have to continue next time to figure out who is trying to frame Rufus for writing something he says he did not write. Confusing. Bye.